running's just my medicine of choice. And if I'm running, it does help. And you know, as everybody does, even if they've not seen combat or had PTSD form in it, it's not just combat that creates PTSD, obviously, but some people cycle, some people drink, whatever it is. Running's just my way of dealing with it, because it never goes away. But I think there's a really good interview with Liam Gallagher that was on the radio a long time ago, and he runs, and he says when he wakes up, he either go for a run or drinks 10 cans of Stella. So he makes a choice, and inevitably he's running. And I think there's other celebrities who've done the same. So I think it's very relatable, and it's very easy to do. You just go out your front door, turn left, run for a bit, turn around, come back.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Running Tales podcast. My name's Craig Lewis, and this week's attempt to tell the extraordinary stories of everyday runners sees us chatting to Colin Kirk-Potter, a former Royal Marine and running coach whose claim to fame is beating none other than Scott Jurek at the 2008 Ultra-Trail Du Mont-Blanc. Colin has completed a whole host of races, including the Bob Graham Round. He's opened a running shop, and he's even written a guidebook outlining the best trail and fell routes in Dartmoor, even if it didn't go down too well with some of his friends who wanted them to stay a little more hidden. But perhaps Colin's greatest challenge came when struggling with PTSD after serving in Afghanistan. It was the power of running which helped him to rediscover himself and find peace. But I started our conversation by asking him how he came to beat a legend like Scott Jurek.
Yeah, it's by default, really. 2008, I overtook him coming down into Courmayeur, and I got to see my family in Courmayeur and had a bit of a panic and said, I think I'm going too fast. It was quite a hot day, and they went, no, you're doing fine. I said, no, I've just seen Scott Jurek and I've just gone past him, and that doesn't happen. But I've since found out that he had a bit of a fall, and he's got a picture in his book, Eat and Run, with a massive gash on his knee. And if you look at it, read the book, in the book, he's got a photograph of him, UTMB 2008, with blood running down his knee. But he's actually not in his results. So he doesn't, I think he just writes it off as one of those, he just puts it as a bad day. So I looked out really on his bad day, and as any race it can be, it could just be on the day, can't it? So I have no idea who else I beat on that day, but I didn't really care. So that was that was a bit of a bonus, really.
Yeah, ultimately, it doesn't matter how it happened. The results will just state that you finished higher up in the order, which is pretty fabulous. How did you come to be running UTMB in the first place, and how did you find that race on the day? It's a pretty amazing race to do.
It was my old friend and coach had always wanted to do it. He was a good 10, 15 years older than me and had wanted to do it. And we'd entered certain races such as the Fellsman up north, and he'd done a Bob Graham 10 years previous, and he persuaded me to have a go. And so I had a go at that, and then had a go at a double a couple of years later. And it obviously gave us the qualification ports for this race. And me, him, and one other said, well, let's try and get in. And it was a lot easier to enter then. You just had to get the points. Race companies didn't have to pay for the points. They were just given the points on merit. So it was quite easy to enter, and we got in. We trained quite hard, and it was a bit of just an adventure, really. I was still serving as a Royal Marine then, and get some time off, and then just enjoyed the journey. And it was a case of just running through the streets, and everybody was running with poles. And for my running in those days, nobody ever used poles. It was just for walking. So it was a bit weird running through the streets of Chamonix to begin with, and everybody click-clacking around with poles, and there was just me in a pair of Brooks trail shoes, and just off we went. So it was just amazing. I just enjoyed the journey, really. I had no expectation of doing that well, or I just wanted to get around, really. It was it was fantastic. I'd not even heard of it until my friend Stuart had actually said, should we go and do this? So it was a bit off the cuff, really.
Well, that's the funny thing about some of these long races, which are becoming quite iconic now, is 5-10 years ago, they were sort of a bit fringe, a bit niche, brilliant runners in them, but not publicly known.
No, it was the first year that Kilian Jornet did it. He wasn't allowed to enter until he was 21, and there was this plucky little Spaniard right at the front bouncing around, and he set off like he was running a 10K, and that was it. Marco Olmo gave chase, and I mean, I got myself quite near the front. I got delusions of grandeur, I think, but nobody saw this chap again, and obviously he won it, and that was the start of things to come. And he's obviously gone on from strength to strength, hasn't he? So
yeah, definitely, 100%. And I actually watched Unbreakable over the last week of the Western States, and the one he blew up, but the whole thing is just phenomenal. I don't know how people run like that. But for you, how did running start for you? Have you always been a runner?
Born and bred on the edge of the Peak District, and if you wanted to get anywhere, there was no public transport. Learning to ride a bike was a death wish because everything was up or downhill. So it was getting to the bus stop for school or running to school so you could save 50p. And then a friend of my dad said, "Oh, there's a fun run coming to town. Do that." It's a 4 mile fun run. I did that as a kid, and then you do cross country at school when cross country was a thing, and just got into it from there. And I obviously wanted to join the military, so I knew I had to get fit. Then you do your local fell race, which is the Dovedale Dash, a fiver to enter, 1,600 people just head throughout the day in this field in the edge of the Peak District, and everybody cascades down this big hill. And it just went from there. And obviously, you end up running quite high standards, not on the roads. I couldn't stand running on the roads personally. There was a death trap running on the lanes around me. So, and then obviously in the service, people have said, "Oh, your running's quite good." I got pulled out of training to go and enter the athletics for the Royal Navy. Didn't do very well because I put about 1.5 stone on in training as a Royal Marine. And then the beauty about the military is you've still got facility and to do that. And once your training is finished and you're at a unit, there's lots of opportunity to enter these events. And they will give you time off if you're good and you can represent, as I did, the Royal Navy. So that's how I went through it, really. And then I've just continued on and on. I don't race as much as I used to. I do it more for a spiritual thing now, which is quite weird to say as a former Royal Marine, but that's where my running journey's taken me from now.
Yeah, you brought me out in slight palpitations there, mentioning the Dovedale Dash, because I did it. The pleasure of doing it earlier this year, and I think it's probably bizarrely because of the short distance, the hardest race I've ever done. I did slide down that first hill at the start, literally on my ass.
Oh, yeah, it is frightening. I mean, every time we do it, it's like the charge in the film Braveheart, where they all just leg it down the fell, and nobody knows. You only know it started when you see all the runners going, because there's not much of a start, ready, steady, go. It's just a piece of string, and then everybody just cascades down the hill. But in actual fact, the kids' race is far worse. They send you round down the hill the other side, and then along the river, then up the same hill that the grown-ups finish. And one of my boys did it, and you could tell what he had for breakfast when he finished over the line. He was fourth, which is not bad for a Devonian, but yeah, that's brutal for the little tackers. It's just harsh. So it's you do it as an adult, but you're normally used to it, and like you say, it's a bit of a sprint. It's only 4.5 miles.
Yeah.
But the kids, it's disgusting.
The kids' race was brilliant because the little ones coming in, they were all tiny, and they were just coming in. The ones in first, second, third, and probably you'd just say your son in fourth. Just sensational, just amazing times. I thought there's future champion runners amongst that lot.
Yeah, provided like myself and a lot of people, when your running career is really good up to about the age 14, 15, and then if you're a country folk like me, you start to discover beer and girls in my case, and then that's it. And fell running wasn't really a thing. It wasn't great for attracting girls, whereas playing rugby and doing whatever was. So you tend to fall out of love with it. And my kids have been the same. They fall out of love with it. It's only till you get later in life you actually get back into it. I think there's a lot of kids who I see in Tavistock where I live, a lot of kids are really good and pushed really hard, but then all of a sudden there's a massive gap. And the fell running series we've got on Dartmoor, there's a big gap of sort of 18 to 30-year-olds, and then once you get to 30, there's a massive influx again of runners. So it's something that's always been a case, I'm sure. And as a coach, I think we're missing a trick somewhere. But I think it's the same for everybody when they're growing up.
Yeah, I think most sports kind of struggle with that perhaps a little bit, and you get people who just drop out at that age as they do discover those twin things of girls and beer, and drags us all down a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does, definitely. Yeah, women weaken legs, my coach used to say. So anyway.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of times about heading off to the Marines and how you got opportunities in running there, but it also ended up sending you to Afghanistan, where you must have seen some I'm guessing some pretty awful things.
Yeah, as we used to say, it's life in a green suit. I think if you're allergic to chocolate, don't work in a chocolate factory, and it's the same as there. You know what you're signing up for, and it is nothing prepares you for combat, just training. And I used to be an instructor. My final draft was an instructor in the Royal Marines, and you can prepare these youngsters and recruits, if you like, for his best. But until the rounds and start flying around and then somebody gets hit or there's an IED, in that case in Afghanistan, you can only prepare them so well. Training just kicks in. It's the aftermath and the things. And my last tour was a little bit different because home life was a little bit difficult. I was 40 years old by that time. And I think then it hits home when you start to think it's actually time to get out. I think climbers have said the same sort of thing. They're okay to a point, but as soon as they've got family responsibility, they can't push the envelope as much as they used to. So things changed after that for me. But I still managed to run in Afghanistan. We had a little compound where we were, CP Washburn, and I'd marked out a 50-metre stretch of sand. And in my time off, I wasn't on sentry duty or out patrolling or manning the radio or cleaning something, I just used to just put the headphones in and run up and down there and aim to do 5K or 3 miles and as quick a time possible, just running up and down this line in the sand. It was just to pass the time. And I got visions of actually entering races when I got back and thought, well, I need to stay fit and still have some sense of normality, if you like.
Did it also help you to cope with what you were doing on a day-to-day basis, which must have come with some stresses? And I know that also you had PTSD at one stage as well. Is running something, and the mindfulness you get from running, something that's helped you with that?
Yeah, I can't run with music. I think that's the best sort of example I can give in that, because if I plug in music, then you always play the same playlist when you're exercising, I believe, and then your mind starts to wander, and mine tends to go into dark places. So I tend to engage in it. And if I'm thinking about it, running down a technical hill, fell or whatever, then that occupies, and you switch off from the rest of the world, and it gives you a release. So yeah, it did. The mistake I made is that when I came back, I didn't run. I discovered to follow everybody else, and I thought the right thing to do was just get drunk and just have a poor opinion of everybody. So I used to go into the local town and pick a fight, basically, until my wife said, no, you're textbook PTSD. And luckily for me, and I think there's a lot of people still struggling. Well, I know there's a lot of people still struggling. I was flagged up really early, so I was able to be pointed in the right direction. Having said that, you still want to engage. I had a family and wife, as I say, so I needed to engage or lose all that. So I had to engage in that sort of treatment, and I had EMDR therapy and things. But I was fortunate. I know there's still people from conflicts, not just Afghanistan, who are still struggling, and right back to the Falklands and maybe before, who have not managed to get help or not found the right channels, if you like. Running is just my medicine of choice, and if I'm running, it does help. And you know, as everybody does, even if they've not seen combat or had PTSD form in it, it's not just combat that creates PTSD, obviously, but some people cycle, some people drink, whatever it is. Running is just my way of dealing with it, because it never goes away. But I think there's a really good interview with Liam Gallagher that was on the radio a long time ago, and he runs, and he says when he wakes up, he either go for a run or drinks 10 cans of Stella. So he makes a choice, and inevitably he's running. And I think there's other celebrities who've done the same. So I think it's very relatable, and it's very easy to do. You just go out your front door, turn left, run for a bit, turn around, come back. But it does help. But yeah, as soon as you stop running, that's when the issue is, for me personally anyway.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, actually. We've had quite a few people on the podcast in the past who've struggled with perhaps all sorts of different things, from PTSD to addiction problems and so on. And a lot of them have said to me, do you know what? The thing that I've become now is why I'm so good at running, why I've done such a lot of running, is because running is now my addiction. And it means I don't do those things, but I do lots and lots. I have to do lots of running instead.
Yeah. The issue is when, as inevitably, we pick up injuries or life gets in the way and you can't run, and your schedule goes out of the way, or you're following a training program and you can't run. Obviously that addiction then rears its head, and it becomes a bit of an issue. I found if I can't run for injury or family commitments or work commitments, etc., then I write. So I just write loads of notes down. I end up writing a book over COVID, because obviously we couldn't do anything. So you find a different avenue. It's still about running. It's not so. It's still that medicine. The actual act of putting one foot in front of the other, I might not be able to do, but if I can still focus on it look at different coaching techniques, looking at different routes on an OS map or a Harvey's map or whatever, and then actually write about it. That still gives me my outlet. Otherwise, it'd be very easy just to sink into a bottle or into a path of self-destruction, I think, again.
Well, you brought me quite nicely onto my next question, which was to ask you about some of the writing that you've done, and you did that book over COVID, which I think tracked various routes and trails and paths around Dartmoor. Can you tell people a little bit about that and what the book's all about, I suppose?
Yeah, it's my wife's the academic. I'm just a squaddie. But a lady I met asked if she'd come down from Wales and asked if I knew of any routes on Dartmoor. We spent about an hour together pouring through maps and descriptions. And in the end, she said, "Do you know what? Do you want to take me for a run?" So I did. She said, "You ought to write a book about it." And then COVID hit. And I thought, you know what, I will. And she helped me write a synopsis and how you present a book. And then obviously COVID came and I sent off the synopsis. She said, "It's great," but the boss has said no, the bottom has dropped out of guidebooks. I thought, well, of course it has, because we're all confined to home. So nobody's buying any guidebooks now. So in a fit of rage, I sent it to a couple of other publishers that I just Googled, and then one of them came back and bit my hand off, Pez de Press, a chap called Franco. And they've done a series of these books around the area and said, yeah, we want this many routes. This is how we're going to lay it out. Just put your own personal belligerent twist on it. And that was it. And I just wrote it. And it was great. Once COVID lifted, I was able to put lots of my favourite routes down. Fell out with a few friends who I run with on Dartmoor who've accused me of opening up secrets to our favourite runs on Dartmoor to the masses. But having said that, Dartmoor is a massive untapped resource. It's the least visited national park in the country. It's got legends of being scarier. The Hairy Hands and obviously Hound of the Baskervilles was set on Dartmoor from Arthur Conan Doyle. And people go, same as Dovedale in the Peak District, people go there, have an ice cream, walk to the steps, walk back. Dartmoor is very similar. There's 365 square miles of it, which are virtually on tap. You can go for a run at any time of the day to some really remote areas and not see a soul for an hour. It's which is great. Probably the book's not really helping that, but it is quite niche. It's some trail runs and some fell. I've set up my own grading system, so if I've classed it as fell, then there's not really a path, and you've got to have some navigational skills. If it's on trail, it tends to be on decent tracks and paths, and there's fairly enough footpath signposts and landmarks to get around. But it's fairly unforgiving, Dartmoor. The 2010 was on Dartmoor, and everybody got lost and complained because the weather was so rubbish, and it all looks the same. It's not like Snowdonia where there's a cafe on the top, or there's trig points all over the place. Every part of Dartmoor looks exactly the same as every other. So yeah, it was just to introduce people to running on Dartmoor, and there isn't just the coastal path or some of the woodland that we have down in Devon.
And it sounds like that's the kind of running that you really enjoy. I think you said earlier you're not one to go out and sort of pound the pavements or perhaps do a road half marathon or a marathon. Getting out there in those hills, that's your thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've ran half marathons and marathons. A friend of mine fell down the stairs and broke his leg, so I took his place at the Great West Run in Exeter and came ninth. I think I did an hour 19, but it just didn't have the same feeling. So whereas I can run on the fells as quick as I can I used to be able to on the road, and it there's more bang for your buck. There's a lot more benefit from it. I can drive on road. I commute every day, so why would I want to run on those roads? Whereas on Dartmoor, or any trail, it's different every day. You can run a trail from A to B and the next day run B to A, and it's a completely different aspect, and it gives you a different reward. Okay, it might not be the same speed. You're not looking at a Strava, and it might reduce your pace down a little bit maybe, or you've got to watch where your feet are, and there's carbon fiber shoes are no use to you whatsoever. But it's just a different sport. Running's such a broad church, isn't it? Mo Farah's a runner, Usain Bolt's a runner, Kilian Jornet's a runner, but you put them all together and neither would be able to compete against each other. So that's definitely my type of running. As I say, I've done most of the classic fell races, Bob Graham, and ran all over Europe and stuff. So but Dartmoor still is the place I go back to. It's handy because I live there, but it is a beautiful place. As a Royal Marine recruit, you can't stand it because you're carrying loads of kit for no reason. It's it's the grimmest place on earth. They make you carry a 16-kilo piece of concrete to simulate some sort of bazooka that we used to carry, a Law 94. Whereas now I can have the choice of going, where I like, whatever. And sometimes you come across recruits and they look miserable and they can't believe that somebody's doing this in their leisure time. But it is beautiful, Dartmoor. It's somewhere I'd encourage some of the top trail runners and recreational runners in the country to come and visit and actually explore. And it's completely different. It's I know I've got the South Downs just up the road from where I am now, and that's teeming with runners, whereas I can run out on Dartmoor and as I say, not see anybody. So it's great for the soul.
Yeah, and I bet a lot of people getting into ultra running or fell running will sort of go, I'm not sure I want to be carrying a camelback or anything like that. It must be easy for you after what you would have done in the Marines.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's a lot easier than that. People say, "Oh, I don't want to carry this, that, and the other."
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, some of the weight we used to have to carry was incredible. But it's a lot nicer now. And at any point, you can just say, you know what, I've had enough now. I'm just going to turn left here, drop down, and then I'm back home or back to the car or whatever. So it is nice. But yeah, the guidebook hopefully will just lend people a little bit of a tool, and it's not by any means an exhaustible range of runs. It's just hopefully for people to use as a guide, and then if they like a route, they can maybe add on a little bit more or take a little bit off. So yeah, it's just an introduction. I do bleat on about kit and equipment at the start and weather and this, that, and the other as well. That's my belligerent nature coming in, but it's just purely my opinion. And people can take it or leave it. But it just creates a little bit more interest for the book rather than just being a set route guidebook, if you like.
Just going back to perhaps going over your own story, we kind of left you going into therapy with the PTSD and so on, and at that point you weren't running at all. What moved you back into getting back into running and then getting back into running to such an extent that you were doing big races again?
I needed a job and I needed to work, having left the service. I didn't fancy working for anybody because in my arrogant nature, nobody was good as working for the Crown, if you like. So I set out on my own, and the only thing I really understood was PT and running. So I got a gazebo, managed to get a couple of trade accounts and set up a running store where we used to visit races in the local area, a bit like Pete Bland does up north. And that took off, and eventually we got to a shop and stuff. But obviously, if you're talking about running, coaching about running, and it's okay having a legacy of saying, yeah, I've raced this and I've won this race and I've done that and the other, but you still need to actually do it as well. So it was almost, I was forced back into it. And then as soon as you done 2 or 3 runs, you then remember the magic, gives you the same sort of energy rush as, a couple of pints of Stella did, and a hell of a lot cheaper. And you sort of then think, why did I not do this before? So, and then you do it on your own, and that's great, but then you want to share that. So we set up a running club on the area for people with mental health, and nobody turned up. And we had 5 or 6 locations, and it was just me, and nobody turned up. And I thought, well, why is this? I've rediscovered running. Why? And it's helped me. Why won't everybody else come? And then a friend of mine I served with said, so let me get this straight. You've set up a running club for people who are mental. And when he put it like that, nobody wants to be labelled, do they? So we set up a trail running club through the business just for anybody. And lots of people came along. 3 out of 10 people are suffering from mental health. For every 10 runners we got, at least we were helping somebody find their own sort of therapy or journey and things. So it was a necessary evil. But as soon as I found I was back running, then one thing led to another. They think, right, I'm going to enter that race, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to run this challenge, or I'll go and pace somebody on a Bob Graham or whatever. So yeah, and I've not really looked back, even over the age of 50. I'm still running. No training program as such. It's just a case of as and when I get out and run with the dog or do whatever. So
yeah, and coaching as well now.
Yeah, it's just helping people with a little bit of a running form so they move better, more efficiently, and rather than just downloading a program off the internet that says do this, do that, just having a little bit of a personal feel. It is my own feeling that people of a certain age and of certain ability who don't want to actually win a race, but want to actually be the best they can be. And if that is in last place, but they've actually turned up on the day of the race as fit as they can be and they achieve something. That's generally my clientele. But it's my belief that most people do too much mileage. Most of my clients are of a certain age, and less is more and quality is better. And there's no point in just running for the sake of it. There's more things to life. Even though we're both massive running advocates, there are other things in the life: partners, kids, work, art, literature. There is different things. So I always found training for an ultra really destructive on home life, because it's not actually the doing the 50, 60, 100 mile event. It's actually doing all the training continually. So I'm a massive advocate of that, and actually still getting people to achieve what they want to achieve. I only coach people for trail and fell generally, unless I'm really sweet talked into doing something for a half marathon or a marathon or something like that.
And just thinking about that, in your opinion, and I know this might kind of vary on what the course is like, how hilly it is, exactly how far it is when it's an ultra, but is there a kind of set mileage that you might do to do, say, I don't know, say a 50-mile trail run? Should you be looking at, some people might start talking about 60, 70 miles a week, but can you do it on 30? What's your sort of thoughts on that, especially saying you could do less?
Yeah, I think so, depending on what their day-to-day activity is. So again, from experience, as a Royal Marine recruit, you end up, get your Green Beret to pass one of the commando tests, you end up running a 30-miler across Dartmoor. At any point in training, there is never any point where you run more than 9 miles in a speed march, and then that's a jog walk with kit in 90 minutes, 9 miles in 90 minutes. That's as far as you would run. But you're on your feet all day, so you're probably doing a weapons drill, or you're running around the countryside on Dartmoor, or you're walking from here to there, or you're on the drill parade. Excuse me, you're not sat on your backside. But the act of physically running is not that much. So if you've got a fairly active job, take a postman, and you've a fairly active job, then just by doing 60, 70 miles a week is in my belief detriment to what you actually want to do. I think you can get away with running at a certain age 3 to 4 times a week, doing some low intensity stuff, maybe hurt yourself once a week, working at speed, and then just go out and jog walk on a weekend on a specific terrain that is akin to what you're doing. And we're blessed in the southwest. We've got great coastal paths, lots of hills, lots of technical stuff, loads of bog on Dartmoor. So that trains you for other things. Training for a Bob Graham, I did mine in 19 hours 50, I think. And the furthest, I did the Fellsman after that. The furthest I did a 40-mile run on the coastal path, and didn't run for the rest of the week. But I think because of my legacy of my job as a Royal Marine at the time, I think I got enough mileage in my legs. For an office worker, it might be different, but I would still say we do too much mileage.
And I guess the danger of all that mileage is increased potential for injury, and also you kind of burn out, whether that's physically or mentally, just sort of have enough of it after a while.
Yeah, and again, most of the clients I coach, and I remember winning a race a long time ago in as a youngster, and I was very arrogant and was taking a mick out of people who didn't win. And my coach said the only reason you won that is because there was another 50 people actually turned up. And I suddenly realised that actually a race is only a race if there's other people. Otherwise, it's just training. And the people that I actually train they have families, they have jobs, they have life. They're not a professional athlete where they can train in the gym in the morning, run in the evening, sleep in an air bubble, all this type of stuff. They don't have that. So my biggest gripe is I ask them, why are they doing it? Is it for escapism? Is their marriage on the rocks? Do they want to escape home? If that is it, then you need to run, but focus on some other type of therapy as well. I think you need to find out, if you are running for a purpose, what is it? Is it to be fitter? Is it so that home life is better? And if you're doing 100, 120 miles a week, that's not giving you time to focus on maybe what is important at home as well. It's just taking you away. To train for an ultra, I used to get up at 3, 4 o'clock on a Sunday morning, run for 5 or 6 hours, be home by 10, have a shower just as the kids were getting up, and then you'd spend the day with the family. There's no point in going out at 10 o'clock in the morning, coming back at 10 o'clock at night, because then that's written a day off, and then you're back to work on the Monday. And as a Royal Marine, you were deploying away for 6 months at a time, and you valued that time with your family. So between Laura, my wife, and I, we got 5 kids. So we're quite busy.
And just finally, for anyone who might be thinking, oh, I want to try this running thing, I want to try and get out onto the trails a little bit more, away from roads, maybe, what would your advice be, and why should they do it, I suppose?
If they're an avid road runner, I'd say that trail running gives them a different aspect. It stops the compound, so I'd do it as an alternative, as an aid to their training. But if they just want to start running straight off the bat, Couch to 5K is great, and it's proved to do a lot of other things. I think the one thing that Couch to 5K misses is it doesn't teach people how to move. If you go to a playground and watch kids run at a primary school, they run perfectly. As soon as they get to secondary school, they lose it. And as adults, we just think that running is one foot in front of the other. So my first advice would be to somebody who wants to start running is learn how to run, learn how to move better. Walking and running are biomechanically completely different. Cycling and running are a lot closer, in my belief. So I would urge them to find somebody locally to them, teach them how to move properly, because otherwise they're heading for a fall. If they can move properly biomechanically, they'll enjoy it a lot more, be less chance of injury. And by running on trail, your form tends to be better, because if you overstride on trail, you're going to be on your backside. So it's just a good aid.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating what you're saying about running like kids, because I spoke to Chris McDougall from the Born to Run fame not so long ago, and he said we should all look at the way toddlers run with a heads up and pitter patter really quickly, rather than these long strides, and that is how you should all be running, which frankly is nothing like I run, but there you go.
No, not me. Not me. Do as I say, not as I do. Yeah, it is that. And if you watch a toddler pick up a toy, they squat perfectly. You get a teenage sibling to do it, and they just drip and moan at you all the time, and nobody's taught them to lift, they just cheat. Nobody's taught a toddler to pick up a toy in the perfect squatting position. Whereas you can go to any gym in the land and nobody could squat properly. So yeah, we need to go back and learn that again. And that's not easy. I'll leave you with one of my best coaching techniques. If you fold your arms, that is your default setting. Your fascia has predicted you. That's how you move. If you fold your arms the other way around, that's what you're trying to achieve, better running form. And it feels awkward and wrong, but if you do it enough times, perfect practice makes perfect. If you do it enough times, then you can fold your arms either way and it becomes seamless. And running needs to be the same. It needs to become unconsciously conscious, and that's the way it is.
Super. Oh, well, that's absolutely brilliant advice, and a lovely way to finish off this chat. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today on Running Tales.
Thank you very much, Craig. You be good.
Thanks again to Colin Kirk-Potter for joining me today on the Running Tales podcast. I hope you enjoyed his story as much as I did, and make sure you're all out there running like a toddler as soon as you can. If you enjoyed this week's episode of the Running Tales podcast, please leave us a positive rating or review wherever you listen. It really does help other people to find stories like Colin's. Please also check out our social media channels. We're on Twitter or X or whatever it might be called today or tomorrow. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, we are on Instagram, and of course we're on Substack, where we have written versions of these podcasts and loads of other stories from the running world. Thanks again for joining us. Next week's Christmas, so have a fantastic Christmas, everybody. We will be having a Christmas edition out, but it'll be out on Wednesday the 27th rather than our usual Tuesday, so please keep an eye out for that, and I'll see you again soon for another Running Tales podcast.